Mobile app on your Alexa-powered smart speaker and on TuneIn, iHeart, and on Odyssey. Now, from the Signature Bank Studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson. America First with Sebastian Gorka, weekday afternoons at 3 on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Tucker Carlson was on Adam Carolla's podcast, and he sort of followed up with a question he posed to former President Trump in the interview he did that ran concurrent with the first GOP presidential debate, asking Trump if he thought he was under threat of being assassinated, essentially. Now he's not asking, he's telling Adam Carolla that's where the nation is speeding to at present.
I mean, look, if, they protested him, they called him names. He won anyway. They impeached him twice on ridiculous pretenses. They fabricated a lot about what happened on January 6th in order to impeach him again. It didn't work. He came back. Then they indicted him. It didn't work. He became more popular. Then they indicted him 3 more times. And every single time his popularity rose. So if you begin with criticism, then you go to protest, then you go to impeachment, now you go to indictment, and none of them work. What's next? I mean, graph it out, man. We're speeding toward assassination, obviously, and no one will say that, but I don't know how you can reach that conclusion.
I don't know that it's obvious. They're also telegraphing what they have in their back pocket, which is a constitutional argument that he's disqualified from holding office under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment that they haven't really pursued yet with all this criminal litigation pending. For more on that observation and, generally speaking, our politics, economy, and culture, Sohrab Ahmari joins us, founder and editor of Compact Magazine, contributing editor at The American Conservative. He has a new book, Tyranny, Inc., and the subtitle, How Private Power Crushed American Liberty, What to Do About It. So we'll get to that. Sohrab, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Dan and Amy.
Tucker's observations, the only conclusion you can draw at this stage in the process is that we're speeding towards the possible assassination of a former president. A little aggressive.
Yeah, I consider Tucker a friend and I admire him, but I have to say I think that's a little overwrought. And I certainly think that these multiple investigations are politicized. They are just an extension, the next step from what the establishment, I won't even say Democrats because it includes many Republicans as well, how they reacted to a populist president going back to 2015 and 16. And this dream of undoing in 2016 through, I don't know, I don't even want to recount all of it, but the Russia collusion hoax,
right.
The first impeachment, the second impeachment, Ukraine call, all of that, and now it's come to this. But I think, likelihood of an assassination is very low, and I think that's a bit overwrought for me as much as I admire Tucker.
Well, with so much of your mind share devoted towards this representative republic and the direction it's headed culturally and in every other way, I mean, how much of a threat to the stability of America do you think that I would call it the targeting of Trump's elimination from our politics, how much impact does that have? Will that have?
I really, really, really worry about it, Dan, because what's happening, you can look at any individual case and you can say, well, Trump said some bad things on that Georgia phone call. I won't go into the details, but you can say, oh, okay, yeah, but you see the totality of the Democratic effort, and what it looks like is an attempt to turn politics into a matter for law enforcement, and that's really, really unhealthy. It's what we call banana republics. So it's an effort to turn honest political contestation into a thing for the FBI and the security apparatus to quote unquote solve. And once we cross the Rubicon, and I'm afraid we may have already crossed the Rubicon, that becomes really unstable, becomes really dangerous. We try to think of any precedents in our history, and I can only think of Andrew Jackson and his war against the Second Bank of the United States, which was this sort of cherished elite institution. And when he took up a fight against it because he saw it as a corrupt vehicle for kind of the enrichment of elites, the entire elite closed ranks around him and denied the presidency to him, even though he won the popular vote in 1824 through, what people remember, the corrupt bargain between Henry Clay and John Quincy Adams. That's the only kind of precedent I can think of, but that's still, 4 years later, Jackson became president. He killed the second bank and survived and so on. But it's that level of kind of really, really fervid moment where the elites are really anxious about populist backlash and they're closing ranks in a terrifying way.
I would one more question on Trump. It's not all about Trump, but it's Trump as this exogenous event that occurred in D.C. And I just wonder, since you sort of came to Trump late, from my understanding of your progression, like you didn't vote for him in 2016. Do you think that he has been, his boorishness and excesses notwithstanding, he's been a net positive by instigating sort of the outing of what was sort of quietly operating below the surface inside the Beltway? Or has he been a net negative on our politics and polity?
Yeah. No, I think that's a healthy development where we, Americans finally see that we do have a uniparty establishment, which was always there. But even maybe the members of the establishment themselves, they didn't realize the extent to which they were an establishment. And when Trump came around, suddenly someone like Bill Kristol found that he has much more in common with, any given Democrat than he does with the Republican base.
Yeah.
So he became self-conscious of it. And I think also, there's been good policy changes that he muscled through. On free trade, it was Republican and Democratic orthodoxy that all free trade is good. Now it's the conventional wisdom that, hey, maybe some of these trade deals were bad for American workers. Even like the Biden administration and Jake Sullivan, the national security advisor, accept that. But it has come as a great cost, right? So, elites push back. When they're pushed, they push back hard. And they have enormous institutional power to do that.
Well, how can working class people fight back?
Well, I think that in the book, Tyranny, Inc., I point out the ways in which a lot of the threats now come from the private sector. That is, we're used to thinking of government as the only source of threat to liberty. We've learned since the Hunter Biden censorship scandal, elements of the COVID response, that actually corporate America can be pretty devastating too to our individual rights. And so, I in some sense, I call for restoring an older Republican tradition represented by figures like Eisenhower and Nixon that were a little bit more skeptical of corporate power and a little bit more friendly to, or the ability of working class people to mount organized countervailing power against elite power. So unfortunately, I think the Republican Party, despite Trump himself, is, as soon as Trump is out of the picture, it will fall back into the groove of big business can do no wrong. And I think it will pay a price if it does that, because a lot of those working class people, including the highest marginal share of union households who voted for Trump, the highest marginal share for a Republican nominee since Ronald Reagan in 1984, those people are smart, and they will notice if all the Republican Party does is wage kind of culture war, but doesn't pay attention to bread and butter issues, working class issues, free trade, immigration, etc.
Yeah, but the corporate power, the private power, and as we saw with the Twitter files, for example, the government doing through private sector businesses what they can't do what they can't do themselves, which is also unconstitutional. But this is the approach that they take. But that highlights a point, which is the idea that so you want to reduce corporate power in private hands. Where does that power go, and why is there so much power that these private companies have? Would it be so powerful if the government wasn't so powerful and the relationship wasn't so close. So, I mean, in other words, much of the corporate power you talk about is an indirect or direct result of successful rent seeking, where they act as agents of the state. So it still ultimately, fundamentally redounds to being a state power problem.
I would say two things to that. One is that that's always been how market societies work. Markets themselves are created and upheld by government. In other words, it wasn't like the market system just organically spread in the United States after the revolution. We had a Hamiltonian state that believed in all sorts of coercive measures to make sure that the American government and American economy looked a certain way. The second thing I would say is that system having been established, a lot of the concentrations of power you see in the corporate world can't be written off as the result of pure just government favor. Maybe that's true for like corn, subsidies for sure in the agricultural industry. But a lot of it is just the fact that in a complex economy, getting into a market is very difficult once there are established players. Like, there are no mom and pop auto shops. Auto manufacturers. There are no mom and pop tire manufacturers. It's very difficult, as we've learned, to start a new social media company just because of huge barriers to entry. There are what's called network effects and factory effects, and all of those favor largeness. And in some ways, the large is rational. It's good for the consumer. It's just that we need power on the other side, not necessarily for the government, but power from the other side for consumers and workers to mount collective power. And that's what we did in the New Deal order. We just empowered, farmers, workers, etc., to mount countervailing power to huge concentrations of private power.
What form is that? That's private action. That's unionization. That's cooperatives. What is that?
Exactly. You named all the important ones. The New Deal allowed electricity co-ops to form for consumers to push back against large utilities. It didn't destroy the large utilities. It just raised up the power of people on the other side of the market. Labor unions did the same thing in the employment context. There are others that don't need government intervention. When a department store buys, let's say appliances from Sears, it used to be Sears, it mounted countervailing power because it could buy in bulk, and it passed on the savings to consumers. So this is actually a pretty free market idea, which is why Adam Smith, the founder of laissez-faire kind of capitalist thinking, still supported labor unions and this kind of ability of ordinary people to band together to get a better shake out of the market.
We have to have you back to talk more in depth on this, but I do appreciate having you on again. Sohrab Ahmari is the founder and editor of Compact Magazine, contributing editor at the American Conservative. His new book is Tyranny, Inc. Tyranny, Inc. Sohrab Ahmari. Sohrab, thanks for joining us, and hope we can get you back soon to have a more extended conversation on this. A lot to talk about here. This is good.
Sounds good, Dan. Thanks. Bye.
Fine. Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's like a hot, steaming cup of information to start your day. It's Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Balance of Nature's fruits and vegetables in a capsule, changing the world one life at a time.
It makes me feel better because it's feeding my body what it needs. I could tell when I first started this it was going to do something because my mind felt better and I just felt better.
I've seen the ads on TV for